Well, I'm glad to see all of you here tonight. I look forward to our conversation. I'm here with Lucy Fischer, Distinguished Professor of English and Film Studies at University of Pittsburgh. And so let's go. It's a long movie, but I hope you found it as worthwhile as we do. Lucy, you've written about Bette Davis and aging and sisterhood fairly recently. Could you tell us just a bit, you don't have to go on for a long time, about both stars, Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, their star personas, their long-standing rivalries, their off-screen bitterness, just to get us in the mood to start talking about Baby Jane.
Sure. Yeah, they contrast quite a bit. I mean, Bette Davis is born, I think, around 1908 in New England, so she kind of thinks of herself as a Yankee, you know. And she comes to Hollywood in 1930, first signed by Universal. She had been a stage actress, just beginning her career, really, on Broadway, but meeting with some success, and she was scouted by someone in Universal. There's this famous story of her coming to Hollywood to be met at the train by someone from Universal who walks right past her because she doesn't look like a starlet. You know, she's a plain Jane, not that Jane, but anyway, and she goes on to actually move studios to Warner Brothers in 1932, and she stays at Warner Brothers until 1950. So she's identified very much with Warner Brothers Studio as an actress. But her persona, she doesn't really have a single persona because she was known really not for being glamorous, but for being an actress, for really having talent as an actress, which is not always the case with movie stars. They're not always known for that, even though they may have particular screen ability. And she played a wide variety of roles, from playing actresses to playing secretaries to playing gun moles to playing queens. And so the range of her roles, and she was also known for playing roles that other people wouldn't want to take, you know, roles of women who were completely unlikable. Her breakthrough movie was when Warner's loaned her to RKO in 1934 to play in A Human Bondage, where she had a role, Mildred, that was you know, not at all a likable role, and she, in fact, you know, was nominated for an Academy Award. She didn't get it. So her persona was very much identified with acting, independent women, tough women. Joan Crawford, on the other hand, she started out as a dancer. She was born in Texas, a more working class kind of family than Bette Davis, though Davis was not wealthy at all. And a dancer, and she too performed as a dancer on Broadway, but she came into film 5 years earlier than Bette Davis, but it was a significant 5 years because it was the silent cinema. Davis was one of those theater actresses plucked for the coming of sound, because they didn't think that most silent film actors could act with dialogue. And Crawford was known particularly as a flapper, as a glamorous flapper in films like Our Modern Maidens, Our Dancing Daughters. But she did make a very successful transition to sound, unlike a lot of other movie actors of the period. She was identified with MGM. That's where she started to work in 25, and she stayed there until, I think, 1943. That was a studio of glamour and beauty and lavish sets. And so that was her image. Not so much serious actress. Although in 1943, she moves to Warner Brothers. So then she's with Bette Davis. They shared they had adjoining dressing rooms, but they were not friends. And at Warner Brothers, she, you know, became more of a serious actress, got an Academy Award for Mildred Pierce. I forgot to mention that Bette Davis got 2 Academy Awards for, you know, for Jezebel and Dangerous, and 8 nominations over the years. With Crawford, it was only 1, although she got 2 other nominations. So different careers, one associated with fashion, glamour, the other an actor's actor. Their rivalry and dislike predates working together on Baby Jane. It started at Warner Brothers in that there was some rivalry over who would get roles. You know, they were both actresses fighting for good roles. There was some thought, well, in 1936 when Bette Davis was at the Academy Awards, and she wasn't really expecting the Academy Award for Dangerous. She did get it. And she went in a very plain dress, nothing like what we think of today. And she accepted the award for Dangerous in this very, very plain dress. And evidently, Joan Crawford sort of mocked her publicly for being frumpy. That was not good. And then there were other rivalries. Bette Davis fell in love with French Otone, the actor she starred with in Dangerous, and Joan Crawford married French Otone, which wasn't good. And then on Baby Jane, I mean, actually, Joan Crawford was the one who suggested Bette Davis for Baby Jane. Robert Aldrich had brought the book to Joan Crawford, and then she wanted to appear in it and suggested Bette Davis. So, you know, she was willing to work with her. But then on the set, there were, you know, rumors of strife. There's, who knows if all of this is true, but there was talk that, you know, Joan Crawford was married to the CEO of Pepsi, so Bette Davis made sure that there were only Coke machines on the set. When Joan Crawford had to be kind of dragged a bit by Bette Davis in one scene, supposedly Joan Crawford weighted her costume so that Bette Davis injured her back. Bette Davis then, when she had to beat Joan Crawford, I mean, some of those scenes, she's obviously not beating her, but when she had to slap her face, she slapped it particularly hard. There was all of this, and then when they went on tour with the film, Joan Crawford refused to do the tour of various cities because she claimed Bette Davis took all the good ones. Then, of course, Bette Davis was nominated for an Academy Award as Best Actress for Baby Jane, and Crawford wasn't. That was also a rivalry. Anne Bancroft that year won for the one about the deaf.
The Miracle Worker.
Miracle Worker. And Anne Bancroft could not attend the Academy Award. She was making another film. But Joan Crawford managed to convince Anne Bancroft to let her accept the Academy Awards. So Crawford accepts an Academy Award in the ceremony that Davis was nominated for, but didn't get. So, and recently, some of you may have seen, there was a TV series called Feud with Susan Sarandon and Jessica Lange playing the two actresses, all about their feud. Aldrich and Bette Davis in interviews says there were never any open fights on the set. They say they were professionals, and also it was shot in something like 21 days. Davis says we didn't have any time.
Right.
So that's kind of an overview of.
Very good. I think a little understated, but understood that there
Yeah.
was deep
Yes.
tension between them.
Yeah, they've never had a good word to say about the other when asked.
Yes,
that's for
as I
sure.
told you, one of my favorite lines is 10 years after Joan Crawford had passed away. Bette Davis was being interviewed on some late night show, and the moderator said, well, have you changed your mind after all this time about Joan Crawford? And she said, well, just because she's dead doesn't mean she changed. Anyways, let's move on. The film has sometimes been associated with a camp aesthetic, and Bette Davis in particular has been kind of heralded as a gay icon. Can you say more about these just briefly?
Yeah. Well, camp, and here I'm using, you know, sort of canonical article by Susan Sontag on Notes on Camp. Camp's associated with excess, number one, and this is not a subtle film, as you may have noticed. So there's excess in terms of that. The other thing is that camp, I'm just pulling out the things that are relevant to this film. Camp is takes itself seriously, but can't be taken seriously. And I think this is a film about someone who takes herself seriously, but can't be taken seriously in the guise of Baby Jane, who completely takes herself seriously, her comeback seriously, all of that. Also, one of the things about camp is that it's fascinated with the out of date. And I sort of think of it as the sort of pink flamingo syndrome, you know? And again, this is a film about the out of date. That's what it's about. Davis as gay icon, and this may be a gay icon of a certain generation. You know, most of the men who have written books about her in this way are in their 60s or something like that. What they seem to like about Bette Davis is excess, that she's not a method actor, obviously. She makes fun of method acting, like Laurence Olivier. Laurence Olivier used to say, can't they just act? You know, in other words, what do you need to get into a character? So her mannerisms, the fact that she makes acting visible, she doesn't hide her mannerisms. There's that staccato delivery, her abrupt gestures, she's always playing with something, you know. There's never a moment when she's not fiddling with something. You know, she doesn't just sit there and say her lines. She's not feminine in the kind of superficial classical notion. She's angular, there's a kind of masculinity they see in her. She was a tough cookie. They sometimes called her the fifth Warner brother because she was so tough in the studio. So there's her edginess, her masculinity. There's the fact that she's nasty, and she's always doing these one-liners. In this film, you know, it's like, you know, but you are Blanche, right? You know, but you are in that chair, Blanche. Or, you know, just a minute, you big fat movie star, you know, or mockery, these nastiness that appeals to them. Also the thing that she's always duplicitous, not always, but often duplicitous in her roles. And that maybe appeal to the notion that in a certain generation, gay men had to be duplicitous about their lives. Here, she's listening in on the phone. She's forging her signature. You know, all of those kinds of things that she's hiding.
Well, as I said at the beginning, the film was released in 1962 on Halloween, and its initial critical reception was not positive. But it went on to receive 5 Oscar nominations, including Davis for Best Actress, which she didn't win. It also recouped its costs in 2 weeks and grossed over $9 million at the U.S. box office.
Amazing.
So what do you think accounts for its popular and financial success?
Yeah.
Because I don't think that they thought that this is what they had when they made the film.
Yeah, the studios all turned it down, you know. I mean, Aldrich kind of said, they all said, who wants to make a film about 2 old broads? You know, that was kind of the attitude of the studios. So this was made, you know, basically, I mean, it was underwritten by Warner's, but they wouldn't let them use the studio. They had to make it off-site. It was, I think, $1 million budget, 30 days. You know, it was very hard to get it produced to begin with. Well, Halloween helped, right? I looked at the poster for the film. The poster shows Blanche opening up her dinner, and there's a rat on her plate. Okay, so I mean, that already gets people sort of in the mood. There was a jingle that...
Not for dinner, but
not for dinner,
for Halloween.
Yeah. For Halloween and horror. Aldrich wrote a jingle that played, you know, on radios and stuff that sort of stressed bloody notions of the film. There was not only a trailer, there was a featurette that he shot, which is available on YouTube if anybody wants to see it. There were those reasons, and then I think there was curiosity. Let's face it. If you were of the age, let's say, of Mrs. Bates, right? You know, if you were of a certain age, you had really seen Crawford and Bette Davis in countless movies, and you might have been curious to go and see what this was about. And then there was morbid curiosity, which is, I want to see these women who are such big shots torn down a peg having to appear in this god-awful movie. Because there's a lot of that. I think fans are two-sided. We want to love them, but then we want them to, fail on some level. And then there's the fact that if that horror film was coming into its own, the sort of art horror film, right? There's Psycho in '60, and around that time there was also Peeping Tom.
59, yeah.
Right, and a few, the Little Shop of Horrors, I think. So that was beginning to be a thing.
Yeah. Well, the film's temporal organization, where it guides us from 1917 and then to 1934, and then to yesterday, and then we're in the world of 1962. Clearly Aldrich is exploring American entertainment culture from vaudeville to the movies to television. So the film sequentially depicts Baby Jane's vaudeville act on the verge of World War I.
Right.
And the whole I've Written a Letter to Daddy. Blanche's classical Hollywood star turn in the early 30s, and the rebroadcast of her most famous films on television in the 1960s. Film culture has been preserved and is now being shown on television. Right. And Blanche's career is resurrected because of television. She gets fan mail and so on. Whereas Baby Jane's vaudeville career, her success is remembered only in sheet music and the replica Big Doll, which most people don't remember. So I'm wondering if you'd speculate on, one, why Aldrich, he wants to trace this kind of history of American entertainment forms and its recursiveness, or what's preserved and what is lost.
Yeah.
And, what precipitates, we get a lot of explanations in the film of Jane's psychosis. Is it that these movies are being played on TV and she's feeling more jealous, or is it instead, what we learn too, is that she's known for 4 weeks that Blanche is planning to sell the house?
Right. Well, going to the division of the film, that the beginning, the 1917, the 1934, and then 1962. It is entertainment. It's also, I think, a certain zeitgeist that they belong to, because I think of 1917, it's the era of silent film, right? And it's also the era of sentimentality. I wrote a letter, I've written a letter to Daddy, in heaven. It's both sentimental and so unbelievably maudlin that you want to throw up. Not in Hallmark, not just Hallmark cards, it's like perverted sentimentalism, right? But it's sentimental. And so it's the era of, Lillian Gish and sentimentality, which is out of date, in case people haven't noticed. And then there's 36, which is kind of the era of Art Deco. And it's interesting that when she finds that photo of Blanche that's been crossed out, she's in a very deco outfit. It's glamour deco, not sentimentality anymore. It's, the culmination of the new woman. And then, of course, you have 1962, which is, some level of modernity at that period. But that's the moment at which both 1917 and 1936 are they're anachronisms and totally out of date. So I think there's that, and then there also is, as you say, the different media that are, and I think you mentioned preservation, which I think is interesting because, of course, theater generally wasn't until very recently preserved. Now they film everything, but film could be preserved. But of course, we know that the studios threw out everything or most everything, so only a small percentage of films actually survived. And then there was nitrate fires and water damage, but it could be preserved. But then there's the question of, does a star like Blanche want to see the image of herself preserved? She does. She enjoys it. And then, of course, Jane says, then you're an idiot, But other stars don't, like Maximilian Schell made this film about Marlene Dietrich in her 80s. Right. She didn't want to look at any of her films, and she refused to be filmed, So there's that double edge of preservation, which is you have to you have to look at yourself in the past. And you and I talked about, did you just mention $1 Million Movie or
Yes.
not? That when television needed stuff to fill the hours, then they turned to the studios, right? And the studios, the films that they still had in their libraries that weren't so valuable to them anymore became valuable as filler for television, when television didn't have programming, didn't have what we have, now, which is 1 million channels and streaming of all sorts of stuff. So they filled it with reruns of movies, and suddenly old films became valuable again.
Yeah. I want to just shift a little bit to questions of genre here. And in fact, when you and I were writing back and forth to each other, I mean, when I've taught this film, I often teach it in a genre course about melodrama and horror, and how the family melodrama always verges onto horror, and how horror is often structured around melodrama. And you said, but here we also have the thriller at play.
That's right.
So with this, as many critics have argued, Aldrich's film is not really concerned with the question it poses. Nobody really cares whatever happened to Baby Jane. I mean, that's not the issue. Instead, it kind of explores the aging female star and the kind of horror associated. And then, of course, we have the family melodrama at play with the sisters, and then it's structured a lot like a thriller.
Right.
So could you say a little bit more, just briefly, because we'll continue to explore it, how these generic conventions are intertwined? I mean, even Joan Crawford as the long-suffering melodramatic heroine, who in the end is revealed to actually be the sadist. Who's,
So in addition to the three you mentioned, there's elements of the Gothic, right? Because we've got not exactly a mad woman in the attic, although she might be, but there we have the woman, in the attic, the kind of captive woman in the attic in this film, in a big old mansion, not that sort of thing. We don't have the male villain, but we have, the female villain. So there's also the Gothic. In terms of thriller, I think the big thing here is the editing of the sequences in which Jane leaves the house, and we constantly have that back and forth between Jane leaving the house and Blanche in the house, either figuring out how to cry for help or how to get out of the house, or, both. And the editing is very important in those sequences. In terms of melodrama, I think it is complicated. We have Blanche seems to be the long-suffering kind of melodramatic figure. I think on some level, for me, there is melodrama attached to Jane also, because I think we feel sorry for her in a way. I mean, she's absolutely horrible and, she's villainous, but she's pathetic. And there's pathos. And of course, we don't get a chance at the end to really feel sorry for her, because it's only at the end that it's revealed that perhaps the reason whatever happened to Baby Jane is that her sister made her guilty for injuring her. That's what happened to Baby Jane, right? But we only get that at the end, so we don't have any time.
Right, but of course, then Baby Jane didn't injure her. She injured herself in trying to, injure Baby Jane.
Right, but she made her feel guilty.
For decades.
For decades, which is sort of maybe what really caused her mental illness. But the family melodrama, I think, is really interesting. It's like you say, particularly in this period, I mean, there were always elements of perversity to the family melodrama, but in this era, it really starts turning, with Psycho. And here, first of all, I've written a letter to Daddy in heaven, and then there's other sheet music, some of which is also about Daddy. So all these Baby Jane songs seem to be about Daddy. And she's still hung up on Daddy. I mean, so there's this sort of Oedipal thing.
He did buy her the house.
Well, we don't know that.
Kidding.
We don't know that. He either bought her the house or Blanche bought the house. But, Daddy, there's this Oedipal thing. there's also the stage father or the stage mother. I mean, there's been abuse. You know, you're putting this kid out on the stage, and she is supporting the whole family, so that's not good. And then you have the sisters. And here's where the sister rivalry, and here's where Bette Davis has played 5 or 6 roles of sisters of women, because of course you can be a sister of a man. And in many of those cases, in the majority, she has been the bad sister, starting with a film called To This Our Life in 1942 and going up until The Whales of August with Lillian Gish in 1987. And in 2 cases, she played twins and played both roles, the good sister and the bad sister, but the bad sister is always more interesting. So she's had this ability to sort of, for some reason, play sisters, and often in this rivalry. So I think that's another interesting kind of footnote to this particular film.
I also wanted to, the part of the thriller aspect, you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, and in like horror, you can't believe that baby Jane gets back so soon. That the time, there's just not enough time for her to even throw the note. But of course, communication, so she's, Blanche is an invalid, she's confined to a wheelchair.
Right.
And communication, there's the phone, and she pulls the phone out. And then, she can't even type a letter. And in our age, the idea of being completely isolated. So a lot of the, the horror, the terror is no communication.
Right. That's absolutely right.
And that it plays for like the close-up of the phone that's just a little
zoom.
it's too far in the stairs.
Yeah,
but how do you communicate when in this particular closed-off world?
Yeah.
But we can shift to other families in the film.
Oh, yeah.
So what do you make of Edwin and Delia?
Charming.
How are they significant, do you think, to the film's narrative? This isn't, but I'll let you say more about Edwin.
No, I mean, I think it fits into the perverted family melodrama. I mean, they are another kind of perverse family. I mean, Edwin, is this overgrown kind of baby. He's this, I don't know, late 30s, 40s guy. He's living at home. He's obviously this kind of failure at whatever he's trying to do. He's another person in the entertainment industry who's a failure. We've got, 3 people now, all sort of failed entertainers in this film. And, Delia babies him, I mean, she pinches his cheek, like your Uncle Sam does, and babies him all the time. And so he himself is a kind of pathetic figure. He has to have her call to pretend to be his secretary. And contemporary critics see him as possibly gay, and for that reason, well, for many reasons, not interested in baby Jane. It's interesting that when the film came out, there were coded words for that. So Bosley Crowther calls him an epicene figure, which is, blending male and female, that sort of thing. So that family is meant to be also part of the, and he's supposed to be a potential, ridiculous potential, only in baby Jane's eyes could he be a potential romantic interest, but it's clear that she sets her sights on him and is jealous that Blanche might steal him.
So let's talk about the Bates family that lives next door. Clearly the family surname is a homage to Hitchcock's Psycho from 1960, released just 2 years before. But the Bates mother and daughter seem to represent a new generation and way of living. Their home is open and modern, in direct contrast to the Valentino abode, which is in Italian Gothic style with bars on the window and closed off to the world. But what do we make of the mother-daughter pair next door, especially when we know that Mrs. Bates's daughter is played by Barbara Merrill, who is Bette Davis's first and only biological child?
Right, with Gary Merrill, one of her many failed marriages, right, ending in a very bad divorce. I don't like them either, to tell you the truth. I think, number one, Mrs. Bates is like this nosy neighbor. She seems to appear every single time that baby Jane walks out the door or drives her car. So she's modern, but she's kind of hung up on, and she's both a generic nosy neighbor, but she's also an obsessed fan,
yes.
right? She's become, she sort of says she was always a fan of Blanche Hudson, but now that she's seeing her films again on television, she becomes obsessed like a teenager and wants her autograph, wants to meet her, brings her flowers. She can't take a hint. I mean, she's completely dense, and then when Jane is rude to her, after one encounter with Jane, you would never want to speak to your neighbor again. And, finally she says, I'd like to kill her,
Yeah.
As for Barbara Merrill, she gets to call her real mother ugly or something like that. And the two of them, evidently had trouble together. Barbara Merrill wrote an expose of, life with Bette. Not Mommy Dearest, that's Joan Crawford's. My Mother's Keeper is what it was called. And she wrote it while Davis was still alive. And it was very upsetting to Davis, whereas Joan Crawford's daughter wrote it after Crawford died. But both of them, those two actresses, had these tell-alls by their daughters who hated them. So that's just another kind of footnote to this film, but also their relationship, which is so strange. But I don't think and they're also another female dyad, right? They're the two of them, the two women, they're the modern women, but they're, kind of gossipy and obsessed, and the two older women next door,
Right. So Henry Farrell, who wrote the original novel on which the film is based, represents the housekeeper as a middle-aged white woman. Mm-hmm. So Aldrich transformed the story by choosing actress Madie Norman to play this part as an African American with an active civic sensibility. Now, Madie Norman graduated from Bette College with a degree in theater arts. She took an MA in theater and drama at Columbia University. She taught at Stanford and UCLA for over a decade. So Aldrich chose not just any black actress to play this part. Can you say more about the Elvira character, especially in relation to the larger theme of sisterhood in the film? Mm-hmm. Recall that Blanche wishes aloud that Elvira rather than Jane were her sister and that they plan to move out together.
Yeah. It's very, very interesting. I mean, what an incredible background and very atypical, I would think, at that time for any actor, mm-hmm. black or white. But first of all, Aldrich was a Hollywood liberal, but he came from a very conservative family, Republican family with ties to the Rockefellers. And then I think he kind of got radicalized in the Depression and became, a supporter of Roosevelt. But eventually when he went into the movies, his parents disowned him. And, he never took any of their money. But, he was, so it sort of makes sense that he might have an interest in doing this. We have to think, too, about the civil rights movement at this mm-hmm. time. There were already lunch counter demonstrations. There were freedom riders. I think the University of Mississippi, they had been forced to take a black student. And I think there had been also a Supreme Court decision that interstate vehicles had to be integrated. So things were going on, beginning to go on. Brown versus Board of Education, had already happened, almost a decade ago. As far as Elvira goes, she is a very noteworthy character. Number one, she's treated with such respect. She comes to the house, dressed beautifully in a suit and, high heels, and she doesn't come dressed as though she's going to be doing manual labor, actually. And she's does mention jury duty. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a throwaway line. It's like, right. What didn't have to be in there, that she's taking off to go to jury duty. That's kind of a line probably editors would have said, cut it out. What's the point of that line? But it is this sense that she could be on a jury. But she's also sharper than anybody. Blanche seems to be completely dense, or playing dumb, I don't know which one, but she seems dense about Jane's motives, and Elvira's the one who keeps saying, she's sick, you got to do something about this woman. So she's very, and she also risks her life. I mean, and then I was struck this time in watching it by, she stands up to her employer, of course, to her, regret, if she lived long enough to regret it. But she just is like, you can't do this, and I'm going to report you. That is not the way in 1962 most black employees acted to their bosses. So it's a very, very singular portrayal. As far as Blanche goes in Sisterhood, I'm a little more skeptical of that because, number one, she is still her employee, and she calls her Miss Blanche and, Miss Jane. And yes, they would live together, but we know that Blanche, even before we know Blanche is a liar and has done terrible things, we know that Blanche is concerned with her own well-being, and she needs Elvira to clean the house, to cook, and to take her places. So they'll come move in with me, is like move in with me and take care of me. Which is, what a good sister would do, but, she's not. And then the other thing that's interesting is that there is one scholar, Julia Stern, who's just, who a few years ago wrote a book on Bette Davis, who reading this film reads it much more radically in terms of race as a narrative of liberation from enslavement, but she means black slavery. And she reads it in terms of race. So she sees Bette Davis's white face as stressing whiteness. She sees, Blanche being tied up to that rack above her bed that she can pull as being like gagged, like lynching, and she wants to see Elvira and Blanche literally as twins. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I agree.
I buy that, but it's kind of interesting, that somebody will go. But Davis was evidently a liberal, and Davis had qualms about the only person she kills in the film is a black person. She did have qualms about that, evidently. And supposedly, according to Stern, she was supportive of black actors. So.
Yeah. Well, let's talk more about the film's horror conventions.
Okay.
When asked what disturbed them most about this film, at least viewers don't cite the car accident scene, which I guess is not that horrific. It's a teaser at the beginning. Or the murder of Elvira, which we don't see, but we experience through Blanche's eyes, or even Bette Davis's over-the-top depiction of the way she can throw her voice to sound like her sister. And I know this because these were kind of very creepy elements watching this as a teenager. But what really seems the most horrific is Jane's culinary torture of her sister, first with the parrot and then with the rat. Why do you think this is the case, that the horror is located there? Because there's so many horrific things that happen.
Right, yeah. I think, the horror element is kind of myriad and diverse in this film. First you have to, supposedly have to have a monster for horror. Some people argue it couldn't be human. Noel Carroll argues it can't be human, but people disagree. If there's a monster, it seems to be Jane, but maybe it's really Blanche by the end of the film. In terms of the culinary, I think it has to do, horror encourages both fear, which we've talked about with the thriller aspect, but also disgust. And I think the culinary torture tunes into disgust, which has a lot to do with taste and smell, and those are things we associate with food. So being served, there's two things going on with the parrot. Number one, of course, is it's a pet. We don't eat our pets. That gets into a taboo. Also, we don't eat our pets. You don't want to be served your pet dog. But there's also that we eat birds all the time, fowl birds, all the time, but we don't eat them feathered and beaked. You know, we don't eat them like that on a plate. So to see a bird like that on a plate, even beyond it being the pet, is disgusting. The other thing is that it gets into the issue of filth and disgust. And I think rats, you know, there's rats in our basement, you know, it's usually filth. Rats are in sewers, right? So that eating a rat or a rat on your plate is mixing filth with food. So there's that. The thing about, did you mention the aging woman here, or the aging woman and horror? That here, because Jane is also the aging figure of horror, it gets into the genre that came to be known as Grande Dame Guignol, or hag horror, or there was psycho-biddy movies. All right.
So many words.
So many words, yeah. But she had played aging figures previously. When she was 31, she played in a film called The Old Maid, and also the life of Elizabeth and Essex, the private lives of Elizabeth and Essex, playing the aged Queen Elizabeth. She was only 31. Here she's in her, 50s, and she had also played aging actresses, not horrific ones. In, of course, one film, The Star, which was an aging movie actress, but all about Eve as well. But they weren't horror films.
Well, now Voyager, where she plays a dowdy spinster. Well, let's return to where we started for my last question before we open up, and that is the star personas of Joan Crawford and Bette Davis. While the film offers a brutal parable of the limits of sisterhood and the short shelf life and disposability of celebrity, it also provides, I think, a powerful critique of the American family as a kind of toxic incubator of female ambition. In this way, it's like how the film's ending answers to its beginning. So in the beginning, we remember in the 1917 sequence when Jane demands ice cream. In this earlier sequence, the mother tells the frustrated young Blanche, who is jealous of her sister's success and the attention, she says, "Don't worry, honey. One day you'll get all of the attention." And of course, at the end, they're on the beach, and Jane brings her ice cream. So we have this kind of motif that links the beginning and the ending. But that beginning sequence, at first you think, okay, we see the vaudeville routine, the kind of, as you said, kind of perverse daddy and daughter duo, and then the long-suffering mother who is identified with the other daughter who is also quite angry. Oh, she's definitely angry. I won't forget.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, the minute that we see Blanche, she's, in the wings, and she's looking very angry and upset. And then, yes, when her mother says, when you are famous, don't forget, about, and she says, believe me, I won't forget, and it's said in that very angry way. So there's that return that I guess takes us to the fact that actually Blanche didn't forget, and she actually punishes her sister in a major way by making her guilty for no reason. But there's one other thing in the beginning that I thought was interesting, and that is that it opens with this child frightened by a jack-in-the-box. And, who is that girl? She's nobody. She's not in the film. I mean, she's in the film, but she's not in the narrative. And it seems to me an interesting way. I mean, it's a scene of a fair, at which things are happening, but you cut from the scene of her crying upset with the jack-in-the-box, frightened, to what we're going to get, the vaudeville, sentimental scene of Baby Jane. And I think it sort of also forecasts that what we're going to see is a kind of frightening film that mixes up this sentimentality. The other thing is that the jack-in-the-box is like something buried comes out. It's like the return of the repressed, you know. On some level, this whole film is about that in some ways. So in that sense, it circles back. The last thing is that, of course, at the end, Jane truly reverts to childhood. I mean, her insanity has gone. She's now murdered someone, which has completely thrown her over the edge. And now she's playing with children. She's playing ball with children. She's building sand castles. And she buys the ice cream cones and doesn't think to pay, just like a child who doesn't have money. So she really is a child, you know, at the end. So I think you're right that it circles back.
Well, please join me in thanking Lucy Fischer for being here
you.
tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.